Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
This episode is brought to you by Black Swan Real Estate, led by physician investor Dr. Elaine Stageberg. Dr. Stageberg, a Mayo Clinic-trained physician, together with her husband Nick, has spent years building Black Swan Real Estate into a diversified, large-scale portfolio, now approaching $500 million across 2,000 doors. Now, through their Secure Freedom Fund, a 10% fixed rate of return offering, you can invest alongside them. The Secure Freedom Fund offers institutional quality real estate opportunities designed to deliver strong cash flow, long-term growth, and remarkable tax advantages. This fund is uniquely structured so that each investor can tailor it to their own individual goals. This fund offers a minimum investment of just $25,000, the ability to choose monthly cash flow distributions, or to elect the compounding option for higher overall growth, the option to exit the fund on your own timing, the flexibility to invest in your personal name, a trust, an LLC, or a retirement account, and so much more. If you're an accredited investor who's ready to diversify beyond Wall Street and invest with experienced, trustworthy operators who've been exactly where you are, visit securefreedomfund.com today to learn more. From there, you can review the slides, watch the webinar, and even book a call directly one-on-one with Dr. Elaine Stageberg. That's securefreedomfund.com. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast, where we empower physicians to build wealth, live intentionally, and design a life on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath. Today's episode is a treat. We're talking to a physician who turned one rental property into a $500 million real estate empire, all while raising a family. My guest is Dr. Elaine Stageberg, a co-owner and principal of Black Swan Real Estate. Her journey from medicine to real estate is both inspiring and instructive, and today we're unpacking her story, her mindset, and her latest investment opportunity. Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
First, can we start with what your upbringing was, how you ended up in medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a little bit of a different story coming into medicine. Both my husband and I had very similar backgrounds, and that comes into play when I talk about why we decided to invest in real estate so early in our lives. Unfortunately, my parents struggled a lot growing up. I actually never really met my mom after the first maybe like 6 months or so of my life. And my father had first alcohol addiction, and then eventually that turned into an opioid addiction. And so he was actually in and out of jail quite a bit when I was growing up, and I lived with my aunt and uncle for a while. I was eventually emancipated at 16 because I just kind of saw the chaos around me that came from principally the addiction. And all of the downstream effects that came from that in terms of extreme financial scarcity. Our house was foreclosed on. I mean, you name it. There was just so much chaos as a result of that addiction. And when I was about 14, 15 years old, actually, despite the addiction, I feel like my father loved me quite a bit. And that's probably, a huge source of the success that I have today is that in the setting of that chaos, I did have a core loving central figure in my life. And he and I would have, pretty open conversations about how I wasn't going to thrive if I stayed there. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to, do things with my life. And he was just so in the throes of that addiction. And so I was legally emancipated when I was 16 and moved into Section 8 housing and finished high school, worked in a McDonald's, worked doing telemarketing, like anything I could, right, in my spare time. I ended up graduating high school a year early so that I could move on to college because then I could get loans, and that helped quite a bit with my living expenses. And then kind of the story unfolded maybe a little more normally from there. I kind of went through, a normal undergraduate process, different in the sense that I was financially supporting myself. At that point, I really had like no, family help whatsoever. Things had gotten pretty bad with my father at that point. And then I finished undergrad. I went to graduate school. I moved from where I was born and raised, for graduate school, because things were getting so bad with my dad. He was like threatening me, and things had just kind of taken like a pretty bad turn, and I physically wanted to be very far away. So I moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Oklahoma City. That's where I did graduate school. That's where I met my husband, and kind of through that process decided I wanted to go to medical school. And so I did medical school at University of Oklahoma, and ended up in residency in Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic. And here we are today.
Wow, Elaine, let me just say that we're redefining normal here. As a fellow non-normal child coming from kind of position of scarcity, I want you to know that you're not alone. And,
Mhm.
and there are a lot of people like us out there. And, that's normal too, to have parents that have issues. Not every parent is a perfect parent. We're all human, and each parent has their own struggles. And it's not always the middle class perfect lifestyle that we imagine everyone has. I think everyone has some skeletons in their closets, not as big as yours probably, or mine, but that's normal too. So I just wanted to say that.
Mhm.
And I'm so admiring of how well you have made it through such adversity, and really look at you now, right? I mean, and we're going to get into you now, but I'm like so freaking proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I've thought a lot about that, right? Growing up into my own adulthood, having 5 children of my own. My husband has a very similar background. His father was never in the picture. His mother had a traumatic brain injury when he was 6 years old,
Oh,
and all of the economic downstream effects that came from that. She essentially never really worked again. She hid the extent of the injury from their extended family. So they experienced homelessness and other things. And like his grandparents and aunts and uncles didn't even know, because she had so much shame around that. And then, of course, through my work as a psychiatrist and thinking about attachment um, and resiliency and all of those sorts of things. And certainly, I would wish for our parents a better life. I wish that my father never struggled with addiction. I wish that my husband's mother never had her brain injury. But in terms of the life that my husband and I have, because we both had this very similar core upbringing, which was one parental figure who loved us deeply and was very committed to us, and in terms of their love was very stable. Maybe not in terms of the care that they were able to offer, but in terms of the love was very stable in the setting of extreme chaos and in the setting of extreme scarcity and extreme lack, and never kind of knowing, like for me, it was, was my father going to be high that day or not? And for my husband, it was how ill would his mom be that day as a result of her brain injury. And I think about it now, and again, what I want differently for our parents, absolutely. I would want, healing for them. But in terms of how it created the adulthood that we have today, I would take my childhood all over again. And I know my husband would say the same.
well, it's no wonder that you were drawn to psychiatry, now knowing your background and your husband's background too. How did your initial medical career look? How did it feel?
So when I first finished undergrad, well, let me actually back up and tell a cute story first about that. When I was in high school, and I knew that I wanted to do something beyond high school, right? No one in my family had ever even graduated high school. And I knew I wanted to do something beyond that. This was really like pre-internet. So I would go to the guidance counselor's office, and there would be these big, 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 thick books of like all the colleges and universities in the country. And I would flip through them, and of course I would look at like the ones in Pennsylvania and those sorts of things, because that's where I was from. And it would say like undergraduate and graduate, and I would be like, well, why would I do under anything? Like, I just want to go straight to graduate school. Like, that's how little I knew about the process. And somewhere along the way, I figured out like, no, that's like a required stepping stone. You finish high school, then you go to undergraduate, then you go to, so forth and so on. So I ended up going to a very small private school that was just right there in my hometown. It was a really nice kind of stepping stone of building my independence right after that, emancipation, but still staying, close to what was familiar to me. And then when I graduated, I got a degree in biology, and almost everyone in my class ended up going to medical school. And that just felt so impossible to me, like so untouchable. Like people like me don't go to medical school. Poor people don't go to medical school. I was so lucky to even have done, an undergraduate degree. So I moved to Oklahoma and I did a year in the AmeriCorps program, which is
Oh,
like the Peace Corps.
mhm.
But domestically, I worked for the American Red Cross and did all sorts of things for them, teaching kids about like, general first aid. I did a ton of CPR teaching. I would run shelters when there would be ice storms and other things in Oklahoma City. And then I decided to go to graduate school because that felt like a little more knowable, right? It felt like maybe like a stepping stone from undergraduate to graduate school. I got my master's degree in health administration and policy, and then ended up working for a wonderful pediatrician. Her name's Dr. Laura McGuinn. And I worked on a quality improvement project with her, helping pediatricians to implement developmental screening in their practices and referring out to state early intervention programs and then closing the loop, making sure that the pediatrician knew whatever services those kids would receive in that early intervention program. And it was in that relationship with her that just sort of broke down so many of these ideas that I had. Like, I distinctly remember in my first maybe 2 weeks on the job, she invited me to have dinner with her. And I was like, wow, like a doctor? Like, I'm gonna, like it was okay that I would like work for a doctor, but that I would have dinner with a doctor, that a doctor would like socialize with me, because I had come from such a different background, right? That was just like seemingly impossible to me. If you've had it in your mind that you want to go to medical school, like, you should just apply. You're fully capable. I know you can do it. You have the grades, you have the work experience. And so I did. And I just think now, like, I want to be the Laura McGuinn to as many people as I can, right? Just
Oh,
helping people to see what they can't see in themselves, helping people to believe, like, of course that's possible for you. If someone else has done it, then so can you. And just thinking of how much she just completely changed the trajectory of my life because she believed in me.
yeah, it's sometimes when you grow up in scarcity, it's really hard to step out and picture something, bigger, for yourself, something that you feel like that, that you don't deserve. But,
Mhm.
people on the outside, when they see your potential and they tell you that is such a powerful thing to have someone else believe in you, and that's wonderful that you are paying it forward now, teaching other physicians and coaching. So, thank you. So then you made it to medical school. What'd you think?
I really liked it. I really liked, it sounds crazy for me to say now with all these kids and all of these sorts of things, but I really liked how structured it was. Like, I was just very good at studying all day. At that point, Nick and I were married. We actually got married right before I applied to medical school. Found out that I had been accepted to medical school on my honeymoon, which was a lot of fun. Um, we found out I got accepted to medical school in October, and then school started in August of that following year. So we had kind of that sweet first year of marriage before I started medical school. I was still working for Dr. McGuinn at that time.
Wonderful.
And Nick and I were always entrepreneurs very early on. We always knew we wanted to have side gigs and extra income. And at that time, we didn't have children yet. So we would spend a lot of our spare time just trying different things. And through medical school, our principal side gig was we had a small car dealership, very, very small. But we would do maybe about 5 or 6 car deals per month. And the way our house was structured, it like the door to the garage opened up into, first it was the laundry room and then it was the kitchen, but it was kind of a clear line of sight. So I
Mm.
would sit in the kitchen and I would study, and he would work at his technology job during the day, and then he would come home and we would open those doors and he would be out in the garage working on these cars and I would be sitting at our kitchen table studying, and we would like kind of be together, enough that we could speak with a normal tone of voice and still hear each other, and we'd take a break to have dinner together. And that was the first couple of years of medical school during that academic portion before going into clerkships.
That
um,
sounds awesome. That
and
sounds
when
so
I
sweet.
it was so sweet. And when I think of like the life we have today, even though it's so much busier and there's so many more moving parts, it really is pretty darn similar to that first couple of years of medical school, that we were kind of growing this empire side by side.
Wonderful. And, so do you still do any car deals now?
We don't. No, no. When we moved to Minnesota for my residency, at that point we had done a couple of years of real estate investing in Oklahoma City. And as you might imagine, there's quite a bit of regulation and licensing and those sorts of things for car dealerships. We decided when we moved to Minnesota that we wouldn't open a car dealership here, and we've only done real estate here in Minnesota.
Okay. So speaking of the real estate, how did you get into that? Tell me about that journey.
Yeah. So when Nick and I first met, a lot of what we're talking about here actually came up like on our very first date, and I think for both of us, that's how we really knew, there was really something special here to go so deep so quickly. We had a 13-hour first date, talked about everything from healthcare. I was in my master's program for health administration and policy. He was writing software to help hospitals adjudicate claims with insurance companies to make sure they were properly paid for the services provided.
Mm.
So we were talking about healthcare, administrative costs, and all sorts of things, and talked about our childhoods and our perspectives on money, and what we wanted for our lives and what we wanted for eventual marriage and children. And when we decided that we would get married, we had some sense that we knew a little bit of what we wanted, but we also had some sense that there was probably this whole world that we just weren't aware of because we weren't raised in it, right? Like we couldn't go to our parents to get proper parenting. So we went to people who were a generation ahead of us. We spent about a year just kind of having dinner with people or lunch with people. And this would be things like our friends' parents or people who were a generation ahead of us at work, or kind of anyone that would entertain having a conversation with us. And we would ask all sorts of questions like, how do you have a good marriage? How do you handle conflict? How do you raise good children? How do you know what your purpose is in life? And one of those many, many questions was, what do you do for financial wellness? We probably said something like, how do you handle money? Because I doubt we had the language to say financial wellness, in our
Right.
early 20s. And time again, we heard real estate. Time and time again. It was a clear pattern. We would hear people say, I own this business, but I use the profits to invest in real estate. Or I'm an attorney, and because of that, I have a high income, and then I use that to invest in real estate. Or that was kind of the common pattern was I have some source of high income, and then I take that income and I buy real estate, and that's what has really created my wealth in the long term. So we decided that that's what we would do. And I'll admit, I was very, very, very nervous about it. I have always been sort of the more risk averse person in our relationship. Nick, to this day, calls me the chief risk officer of Black Swan Real Estate. I have veto power over anything that I perceive that he, is doing that's too risky. And we both owned our own home before we got married. And we were going to move into his home after we got married. And I still wanted to list my home despite having decided that we were going to invest in real estate, despite having all of these examples of people a generation ahead of us who said, invest your money in real estate. I thought, well, now's not the right time. We just got married. I'm going to go to medical school. We were hoping we would have a baby, relatively quickly after we got married. I thought this is just too much complexity, like that we would be taking our income and cutting it in half and then taking on additional student loan debt and taking on all of the time burden. So we listed that home, but that was in the post 2008 crash.
Mm.
And we kept lowering the price, lowering the price, lowering the price. And it got to where even if we had had a full price offer, we would have needed to bring about $35,000 to closing between, the mortgage amount that I had and the sales price. And we didn't even have an
Right.
offer in hand. So who knows how much we would have needed. I don't know what the real number was because we didn't even have an offer in hand
Well,
at that time. And Nick said, Elaine, would you agree that it's unlikely that a resident could cause $35,000 of damage to this house? And I'm like, I think that sounds reasonable, right? Like someone would have to like break down every single wall and like graffiti it. I'm like, I think that sounds reasonable. Why don't we try renting it for a year or two, let the market recover a little bit, and then eventually, we'll sell it. And as it turns out, we loved it. I loved seeing the cash flow. I loved seeing the mortgage being paid down. The economic recovery did happen. So I loved seeing that home grow in value. It was only a few miles away from where Nick and I lived in the home that he owned before we got married. And the story there that I think about is, man, how grateful I am that was like one of the scariest times of my life We had just gotten married. I was about to leave my career to go to medical school. I was feeling so much scarcity, so much
Mhm.
fear of, and now am I going to have a short sell on my credit report or a foreclosure? Like, how bad is this going to get? And then just having the bravery to say, you know what, let's rent it, and let's learn that skill set now, even though it feels way too early in life to be learning it, even though it feels like this is a risky time. And that's what led to the whole portfolio. I wonder if it wasn't for that house, when I think about just human psychology and what I hear from so many other investors, I think eventually it would have been, well, now we're having a baby. Well, now we're having our second baby. Well, now we're moving for residency. I think I would have just always sort of said, well, now this, right? Like, real estate investing, it's a lot like, getting married or having a baby or, any other major decision. Like, there's never a good time. There's never a perfect time. You just kind of have to get started with it and learn and figure out what you like and what you don't like, and what fits your, specific goal profile. And I'm
Mhm.
so grateful for that, like, 4 or 5 month period when there was just so much fear that catapulted me into this life that I have today.
Yeah, we talked about this at Latifat's conference, Lise. I gave my talk on leaning into fear, right? And it sounds like you really leaned into that fear. It's very easy and it's kind of self-protective to back away from fear, obviously. But I think the superpower in life really comes from recognizing the fear and then deciding whether it's something you should lean into or not. Is this going to cause me bodily harm, or am I afraid of it because of my prior experiences, and this fear might be holding me back, right? And leaning into the right fears and overcoming that sense of, oh God, but what if everything
Mhm,
goes wrong,
mhm.
really leads to massive growth if you can get through it. And it sounds like you loved it. What surprised you most about this experience of becoming an accidental landlord?
In the beginning, it was so sweet to me to see the families that lived in that house, and we self-managed. That eventually became the property management company that we have today, that we've always managed everything that we owned. But it was so sweet sort of seeing, like, younger versions of myself move into that house, stay for a couple of years, and then maybe they would get married or they would have a baby. It was a very small kind of starter home. So there was like a bit of a repeated pattern.
Mm.
And as I was going through kind of my own maturation into adulthood, and then having this, like, very peripheral relationship with the people who were living in those homes, and I mean very peripheral, right? Like, we would just service maintenance tickets and those sorts of things, but we were self-managing, so we would see, like, oh, you have a crib in the house when you didn't before, like, congratulations, those sorts
Oh,
of things.
yeah.
um and I think Nick and I both really realized then that providing housing for people is such sacred work. It is such a part of someone's life. And, I had studied at the College of Public Health before medical school. And so I think a lot about population dynamics and the social determinants of health and how our lived environment impacts our health so much. And, because at this point I wasn't seeing patients clinically yet. I was still in those, just academic years of medical school. So that was really the first time that I was able to get kind of this, like, inside glimpse into other people's lives in a very kind of intimate way, right? Eventually, as a psychiatrist, I learned everything about everybody, and it's a very, very intimate glimpse into people's lives. And I just liked it so much. It felt like such interesting work to provide housing for people, and then from my perspective, like, again, seeing the cash flow, seeing the debt being paid down, seeing the value of that home go up through the economic recovery, and having some sense, on the spreadsheet of, wow, if we had sold this, like, we would have locked in, a 5-figure loss. And again, who knows how big the loss would have been, because we didn't even have an offer in hand. And now each month it's growing our net worth by, X amount, and it was getting bigger, right? Because the debt pay down would get bigger. And then the value of the home, like, really went up through that, 2012, 2016, 2020, when the market really, really, really recovered post
Mhm.
2008. And there was just so much there that I guess I had kind of thought maybe real estate investing would just be very sort of boring. When we were talking with those people who were generational ahead of us, and they would tell us about real estate investing, it felt very sort of sterile and a lot of just, like, running a spreadsheet. And then when I was doing it directly, I realized how important it is in society to provide housing, like food and shelter. We all need it.
Mm-hmm.
And to
Mm-hmm.
be contributing to the economy in one of the two most critical things that every economy needs felt so aligned with our values.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like coming from housing instability myself, and moving like in apartment to apartment every year or so, and growing up poor, it really makes you like when you are in the position to be able to offer stable and safe housing to other people, it's so gratifying, knowing
Mhm.
how important it was in your upbringing, or how much the lack of it was felt during our upbringings. So that's, yeah, I totally agree with you. And of course, the net worth improvement and the money side of it is also very, very nice, and also fulfills that need for financial stability. So now that you had your first unintentional property, I know that you've massively built your portfolio since then. So when did you intentionally buy an investment property?
So over those first couple of years, we decided, I would say probably 6 months after renting that first home, I decided, you know what, I really do like this. I really enjoy it. Let's purposefully acquire a property. So we saved and saved and saved. It took us about 3 years to save to buy a home. And that was the first time we bought a distressed property.
Hmm.
So we bought a home that was a foreclosure. It had been vacant for 9 years. So all of the things that you might imagine were probably true about that home. We had to touch every single surface on it. We had to put a new roof on, new windows, new plumbing, new bathroom, new kitchen, new flooring in the whole thing, paint the entire thing. It felt so good, essentially seeing a property that was like on the brink of death. I mean, it had been boarded up for years and years and years. And we did a lot of that work ourselves. The roof we hired out because we weren't going to get on the roof. We hired out, things like the plumbing and the electrical, but we put the windows in, we painted it, we laid all of the flooring in that house, we put the
Wow.
countertops in. I mean, if we could figure it out, I wouldn't say if we knew how to do it because we didn't. We were watching a lot of YouTube videos. We were asking people for help, but we were in that property, every single day, probably from about 4 or 5 p.m. until like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, just physically working on it, partially because we couldn't necessarily afford contractors. We bought it like right when we had just enough capital to buy it and then to buy all the materials and those sorts of things we needed from Home Depot. But we were stretching our budget with sweat equity quite a bit. And that was such a gratifying experience too, because neighbors would come and they would say, "Thank you so much for working on this house. I've hated living in this neighborhood with this boarded up property. I can't believe this thing was vacant for 9 years. I never expected it would ever take this long for this property to turn." I would say that was really the start of what then became Black Swan Real Estate, because we didn't renovate the home that I had lived in, right? It was more of a kind of cut and dry. I moved out, someone else moved in, and that was our first time doing deep, deep, deep value add renovation. It felt so good to have the before pictures, the middle pictures, the after pictures, to see it because we had done it with our own hands, to, leave at the end of the day and look at a room, full of tile floor and say, we laid that tile. Like there's something here that wasn't here before. And then to do that, we paid all cash for the property. We, paid cash and used our credit cards for the materials that we needed. And then we did what's called a cash out refi, where we didn't have a mortgage on the property. So then we went to the bank and said, we bought it for X amount, but we've done all of these renovations. We got it appraised. And then we did a cash out refi, and that fully replenished our bank account, plus, paid for all of the materials and everything, plus about a year's worth of our salary at that point.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And I remember sitting in the car, this was with a paper check, and sitting in the car, having left the closing company, and Nick and I just kind of looking at each other and saying, we will do whatever it takes to have as many of these moments again for the rest of our lives. Like, we had created something of real value. We had taken something where there was almost nothing, and now there was a functional home. It was cash flowing. We had replenished all of our capital, and only Nick was working at that point, but it was about a year of his salary that we had made in about 8 weeks' time that it took
Wow.
us to renovate that property. And that was really like, everything with that first home was kind of, let's figure it out. Let's avoid pain. Let's avoid a financial disaster. Let's just kind of get by. Okay, I like this. Let's try it again. And then that first home that was our first renovation, that's when we said, wow, this is a lot of fun. This is very intrinsically motivating for so many different reasons. And then to this day, the extreme majority of our portfolio is very, very deep value add projects. One of our most recent projects that we closed in April of this year, so we've owned it about 6 months, was like literally on the brink of being condemned by the city.
Wow.
And the city called and said, there's no one else in town that can buy this, that can do the renovations, that can do it with the speed that has to happen. Like, would you please buy it? Because otherwise we'll have to condemn it. And we kind of need to condemn it because there's so many code violations and bugs everywhere and mold and water leaks and crime and all the things. But it's hard for a city to condemn a property, right? You're essentially making a couple of hundred people homeless, right? And like that seed of the city calling and saying, there's no one that can buy this except for you. There's no one that has the wherewithal to turn this thing around fast enough than you. Like, please, please help us. It all started with that first property. And
Wow.
just a couple of weeks ago, we got our full clean rental certificate on that property. So it took us about 6 months, and that was a 100-unit apartment community. It took us about 6 months to do like a full turnaround on that.
Holy cow. I can't even fathom going into a 100-unit property that needs that much work. How do you get over the fear of that? Does that make you afraid at all? It makes me sweat bullets.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, it does. And remember the beginning story where Nick is the one that's like, we should do it. And I'm the one that's like, I don't know, right? Like that prevails 15 years later, right? Like personality is pretty stable. So he had been in communication with the seller for probably about 6 months before that, kind of going back and forth, and kept saying like, Elaine, I really see the potential here. Like, I think we've got the bandwidth for it. We had done huge renovations and we had done communities of that size, but we had never done that extensive of a renovation in that size of a community. Right? Like we had done big value add projects in say 20 or 30 unit buildings, and we had owned fairly stable 100 unit communities, but we hadn't combined the two. And we just sort of talked about it. Right. And I think when the mind offers up fear, putting as many things on paper as possible, it really gets us into our frontal lobes, right? It gets us into our executive functioning and gets us out of the amygdala. The amygdala is only meant to keep us safe from second to second, right? Is that a snake? Is that a bug? Is that a cliff I'm going to fall off of? It is not meant to help us thrive. So get out of the amygdala and activate the frontal lobe. And that's what we would do. We would run pro formas. We would make checklists. We would kind of talk through, well, what are the worst case scenarios? And what would that look like? What are the best case scenarios? And what would that look like? What are the things that we must have that make this a no-brainer? Like we asked for certain cooperation from the city in terms of expediting permitting and those sorts of things so that we could, for example, fix 100 water leaks in a 30-day period. Because if you fix them 10 at a time, well, then you just continue to get water damage, right? And then you can't fix the drywall, and then you can't paint, and you can't put carpet. So you need to move with extreme speed in a project like that. And then just really believing that, I think when that call came from the city, really believing like this is about so much more than money. This is about helping to prevent 150 or 200 people end up homeless. And it would be hard, and it would take a lot of rallying our team and leading our team and seeing a vision, but it would be possible. And on the other side of it, we would be so proud of what we had created. And, I'm pausing. As we acquired this thing, there was never like this, like, absolutely, we can do it 100%. Like, there's no doubt. There was a lot of like, we're going to try our best and we know we're going to make it better. And we've structured it financially that it's very, very, very unlikely that we would ever have a financial loss. I don't know how hard it will be. I know that we will get every resource we possibly can to bring to bear. Like the day we closed, we signed a commitment with a pest control company for $50,000 of pest remediation.
Wow.
That's what it takes to eradicate bed bugs and cockroaches from 30+ unit buildings for a 100 unit community. And just knowing that we would figure it out day by day, like even to this day, even with a portfolio of about 450 million, we have about 50 full-time employees, about 2,000 units. It's not as though every day I just come into the office and I have the whole day figured out. I probably have a third of the day figured out. And then about two-thirds of it is just this sense of like, what do I need to learn? What do I need to figure out? What do I need to troubleshoot? And I think when the goals are that big, you need to live in that land of being uncomfortable and sort of being a little bit in the unknown and just be very good at living in the unknown. And that's a little bit
Mhm.
of kind of a tangent from, from your original question.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's actually what I was wanting to get at was so you went from single family homes, sounds like initially, and I remember you doing a talk on single family real estate investing, and
mhm.
then you seem to pivot and go into multifamily and like in a big way, like syndicating and getting other investors. So what caused that pivot? And talk us through that mindset shift of going from single family to large multifamily.
Yeah, about probably 20% of our portfolio is single family homes. We love single family homes. They are so desired. People want to live in them. People are delaying home ownership. They're delaying marriage and children for all sorts of reasons. And so there's really this huge demand for single family home rentals. So we principally built like the backbone of our portfolio on single family homes. And then during COVID, multifamily housing experienced quite a bit of vacancy, and
Mhm.
particularly where we are in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic. There was multifamily housing around the Mayo Clinic that had been held for 25, 35 years by owners. And for the first time, they were experiencing some hardship, right? Things had gone really, really well in real estate for quite some time. The strength of the Mayo Clinic right there. And they were, a generation or even two generations older than us. And it was kind of this mutual conversation of we wanted to buy that real estate. And they said, you know what, like now's probably the time. Like I know that things are going to recover, but I'm 70 years old. I don't want to wait through the pandemic. Like I just kind of want to wash my hands of this. So we bought quite a bit of real estate that touches the Mayo Clinic campus through 2020, 2021, 2022 and onward. And that was very scary, right? Like this is like the theme here of like the decisions are pretty much always scary, or maybe I'm just a scaredy cat. I don't know. But I think it's a common theme.
Yeah.
But my husband will say there were times when we would go downtown and it would be, this would be like fall of 2020. So it's ice cold in Minnesota, dark, right? We're in Minnesota. It's cold, it's dark, heat of the pandemic. And we would look around and everyone we would see would be on our payroll. It would be the plumbers and the electricians and the landscapers, renovating all of these properties and wondering like, are we making the right choice? Like, is the pandemic going to eventually come to a close? Are people going to move back into the downtown area? Like, is this the right choice?
Yeah.
And just believing in it, right? And being a student of seasons and of patterns. No pandemic has lasted forever, right? I'm not an epidemiologist. I have a little bit of training in public health, but if you just look at all of the global pandemics, even going back hundreds of years, they last about 4 or 5 years. This is even pre-vaccine, pre-hand washing, like pre all of
Right,
the advanced.
pre-modern medicine.
Exactly. Like they last about 4 to 5 years, and then you get some herd immunity and things can move on. And so that was really when we made our big pivot into multifamily housing was through the pandemic. There was a bit of scarcity and fear in the market. Interest rates were unlike anything that anyone had seen, pretty much ever because of all of the stimulus that was coming in, and the portfolio expanded quite a bit during those years.
So let's talk about your newest project, the Secure Freedom Fund. For those who haven't heard of it, what is this fund and why did you create it?
So in Black Swan Real Estate, we expanded to work with passive investors back in about 2017. And we created the Secure Freedom Fund last year. It's a $100 million fund that we'll work on over the next several years. And it pays a 10% fixed rate of return to our passive investors. The minimum investment is $25,000. And investors can elect if they would like to receive monthly distributions if they're looking for passive cash flow, or allow their distributions to compound monthly if they're looking for that total overall rate of growth to extend because of the power of compounding. And we really created it because over the last couple of years, as there's been interest rate risk in the market and a lot of uncertainty with who would be elected and then what changes would the administration bring and tariffs and just all sorts of uncertainty that's happening in the market, I heard from investors time and time again that they were looking for some level of certainty and of clarity in their investing. And so we created this 10% fixed rate of return offering so that investors can have a portion of their wealth growing where it's very knowable, right? They
Mhm.
can predict out exactly what their monthly distributions will be or what their growth of their holdings will be over time. And it's been wildly successful. Investors, really enjoy the simplicity of it, the certainty and the clarity of it. And then we're doing the same thing, that we've always done all the way back to those original properties. We're buying multifamily housing, doing value add projects. We manage everything we've ever owned through our property management company. And one of the larger acquisitions that we're working on right now, Villages at Essex Park. Speaking of kind of a full circle moment, this is low income housing here in Rochester, Minnesota. We came to Rochester for my training at the Mayo Clinic, but it was kind of even on our radar because Nick had been born and raised in Rochester. His mom had come here after her brain injury to get care at the Mayo Clinic, and then had stayed here, through his entire childhood and through her entire life. And that acquisition, Villages at Essex Park, was a place where Nick had lived when he
Oh,
was a child. Yeah, they had lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, kind of right on the corner. He says it was like one of the nicest places that he
mm.
had lived during his childhood. It was like during a period of relative stability when they could afford a 2-bedroom as opposed to just
Yeah.
a 1-bedroom or even homelessness. And so it feels like this sort of big full circle moment. And we love working with investors and helping investors with their passive income and their financial freedom, and doing all the heavy lifting and the work, right, so that our investors can enjoy that passive part and get all of the financial benefits of real estate, and then get to be a part of this, right? We have quarterly updates where we share with our investors everything that's happening in the portfolio. We have an annual meeting where if investors want to come out to Rochester and meet each other and meet our team and see the properties, they're able to do that. And we certainly hear that, over and over and over again, that investors really like knowing exactly, what's being done with their dollars and the goodness that they're creating in housing.
That's wonderful. So let's dig into this offering a little bit. We've done previous shows on real estate syndications, and listeners, if you haven't, if this sounds a little foreign to you, make sure you go back and listen to those to get a full primer on syndications. But generally, syndications are equity deals, right? Where you're going in and taking the risk, kind of like buying a stock, and you get whatever. If the property does well, then you make money, and if it doesn't, then you lose money. So, Elaine, can you tell me a little bit about the structure of this fund? Because it's kind of interesting to me how there's a fixed rate of return here, whereas most syndications kind of are more variable. So, can you break that down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Many of our other funds are variable rate of return, and I do all of our investor relations. So I'm, talking with physicians and other accredited investors, and just really listening to the needs that they have and the desires that they share and the fears that they share. And I, heard over many years as interest rates went up and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market that investors were wanting clarity and simplicity and having some sense of, I want to be able to open my account and know exactly how much will be deposited into my bank account that month, or to project out, what the value of my shares will be worth after a certain amount of time, using like a compounding calculator, right? If it's a 10% fixed rate of return and I compound it over 5 years, what would it be worth at that point? And so that's when we decided to create the Secure Freedom Fund and structure it this way. So it is an equity fund, which is really important for investors to know because number one, there's a lot more security. So the fund owns all of the multifamily investments that are directly owned in that fund. It's not a debt fund, for example, where we're taking those dollars and loaning them out to other operators. The fund owns the assets. So it owns the sticks and the bricks and the title and the dirt and all of those things. And then the profit that flows through to the fund is what services out the 10% rate of return to investors. And really, the types of deals that we're targeting in the Secure Freedom Fund are deals where we're acquiring them at a low enough purchase price and they have fixed rate debt such that we can project out at least a 10% cash on cash rate of return. And we're principally doing that through loan assumptions. So, for example, one of the acquisitions that we closed a little bit earlier this year had a Freddie Mac loan assumption at 4.25%. The Villages at Essex Park that I just talked about, that's our large $40.4 million acquisition that has a HUD loan assumption at 2.1%. which is fixed for the next 37 years.
Wow.
So yeah, I know, right? Like, it takes forever to get a HUD loan assumption through. And, right now, as we're recording, the government's shut down. So you can't move a HUD loan forward when HUD is shut down. So
Wow.
there's a lot of, there's a lot of headache that comes with loan assumptions, but you get really good interest rates, and you often hold those interest rates for a long, long, long time. So we're really trying to target acquisitions in the Secure Freedom Fund where we feel very, very, very confident in our ability to pay out that 10% rate of return to investors via cash flow. And then if at any point there wasn't enough cash flow to cover the returns to investors, well, then we still have things like harvesting the equity that comes from the debt pay down or the appreciation and value of those properties over time, or the value that comes when we sell those properties and using that profits to service out returns to investors. But really, it just comes down to underwriting them that their operational cash flow services out the 10% rate of return to our investors. And then we have all of that additional buffer, in the event of, plan B, C, D.
Okay. Well, and I love that you've built flexibility into this, that you offer monthly distributions or compounding. Why was that important to you?
So some investors are really driven by cash flow, right? Maybe they're cutting back at work, or they're, at an age where they're starting to step back, into semi-retirement or retirement. And then a lot of our investors are kind of the same age, sort of life stages that Nick and I are, and they're not necessarily looking for passive cash flow today. They're still in like that wealth creation, right? Wealth acceleration part of their journey. And so by compounding their returns, they get a much higher overall rate of return. So if you compound for a year, for example, the effective rate of return goes to 10.47. After 2 years, it goes to 11.5. After 3 years, it goes to 12.87, and then on and on. There's a compounding table at securefreedomfund.com. And it's just really a way to be able to meet the needs of investors. That when we thought about how to create the Secure Freedom Fund, we basically looked at all of the different variables and said, how can we kind of push each of these variables to give the maximum amount of flexibility so that investors can customize it to their own goals? So the minimum is 25,000, and then it's increments of 1,000 thereafter. Investors can invest individually, jointly with a spouse, in an LLC, a trust, a 401k, or an IRA. Investors can elect if they want monthly distributions or the compounding options. Investors choose when they exit the fund. That's called a redemption. They can request a redemption at any time. It is important to note that if they redeem in the first year, they do surrender any of the preferred rate of return, kind of similar to cashing out a CD at a bank early, because we are taking these dollars and investing in real estate. So we want investors to know this isn't like a high yield liquid savings account. But after that first year, it's just business as usual. We process those redemptions on a first come, first serve, best effort basis. And those are kind of all of the variables when you kind of think about, and we'll have investors that say invest with their retirement dollars, and then they compound that because they wouldn't be able to access the cash flow anyway. So they
Mhm.
can get that higher overall rate of return inside of, say, their self-directed IRA. But then they'll have a second position investing with their post-tax dollars, and then maybe they're cash flowing that so that the distributions get into their bank account, and maybe they're cutting back at work or putting a kid through college or those sorts of things. And it was really all about creating as much flexibility for investors to customize it to their needs at a time when there's just so much uncertainty in the economy, in politics, AI, technology, you name it. There's just so much uncertainty right now. And this is a way to give investors an ability to control how their dollars are working for them.
That's a really innovative and interesting idea. I love that. For physicians listening to this who might be accredited but new to passive real estate investing, what are some practical steps they can take to get comfortable?
I think the number one thing is talking to operators directly. So you can go to our website, securefreedomfund.com, and you can look at the slide deck, you can look at the webinar. But I think the thing that's most important is you can block a call on my calendar, and you can speak to me or my husband, Nick, directly and tell us about like what's on your mind. What are your desires? What are your fears? What specific questions do you have? And doing that as you're making any investment decision, talking with the operator and learning about like why this acquisition? Why this return structure? What is your history? What sets you apart? And getting that like lived embodied experience, outside of just looking at spreadsheets, outside of just looking at slide decks, like having those conversations, talking to other investors and asking them, what has worked well for you? What has not worked well for you? What would you do differently? What would you do if you were, in my shoes? And getting as much of that kind of firsthand experience as possible. And then to some extent, right, whether it's, you're buying a single family home in your own neighborhood and, maybe fixing it up and renting it yourself, or you're doing a passive investment, you just have to get into the arena, right? You just have to get started and go through that process. Just like, we do in medical school and in residency, like we study, and then you go see the patient. That's when you figure out, oh, I don't actually know how to take a history, or, oh, I'm a little uncertain about my, dosing of these medications, or, whatever. And you build that experience, through hands-on experience. It's the same thing with investing, like going through the process of signing the paperwork and getting the investor updates and getting the K-1 and submitting that to your accountant, and all of the steps that happen in investing. The more like actual experience you can get with it, the better. Start small and build from there, as you build your comfort level. And it's a lot like learning the language of medicine. The language of investing is very, very similar. And once you know the 50 most used words in investing, you become a conversational investor, and your confidence in your investing increases drastically.
Okay. That sounds absolutely relatable because my mastery of the Krebs cycle did not help me interview a patient.
Exactly. You just have to get in there and figure out, what did I do well and what part did I completely forget about? And
Right, exactly.
right? You get help from the people around you, and then you go out and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again.
Love that. So where can people go to learn more or get in touch with you about the fund?
Our website is securefreedomfund.com, and we have kind of everything there as a one-stop shop. We have the slide presentation, the actual paperwork. We make that publicly available so that people can take a look at it, share it with your attorney, your accountant, your spouse, whoever's important to you. The investor portal, my calendar, Nick's calendar is all there. It's all right there, kind of in a one-stop shop, securefreedomfund.com. And then if someone is ready to invest, the link to the investor portal and the how-to instructions are all right there as well.
Awesome. Well, Elaine, let's finish with some mindset talk for our listeners. Many of our listeners are busy physicians who feel like financial freedom is still really far off or not possible for them. What mindset shifts made the biggest difference for you early on?
I would say the number one thing that really made a difference for me is being comfortable living with as little as possible, and knowing that every dollar that you spend on investing, you have that dollar in the future and all of the dollars that it creates. And then as your lifestyle increases, kind of carrying that knowing with you, like, yes, I enjoy my home. Yes, I enjoy my cars. Yes, I enjoy these things, but I don't need any of it to be happy. And I think the more, particularly early on, but it's true at all times, the more you can lower your spending and put those dollars into investing, then you create that investing snowball, and then it kind of takes on a life of its own. And then before you know it, right, it takes some time, right? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but that time is going to pass no matter what. Before you know it, then you have wealth that's available to you that, is seemingly impossible. And you just have to get started with lowering your expenses and pushing those dollars into investing.
That is like the perfect ending for a Frugal Physician show. Thank you so much. I knew I knew that you and I were on the same page. So, Elaine, thank you for sharing your journey so openly. Your story is proof that physicians can chart their own paths, not just in medicine, but in business, in wealth building, and impact, and that frugality is important. So,
yeah.
Thank you. To our listeners, if you found today's episode helpful and inspiring, please share it with a fellow physician and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode or future conversation. Don't forget to check out securefreedomfund.com to learn more about Dr. Stageberg's latest offering. Dr. Stageberg, thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm Dr. Disha Spath, and this has been the Finding Financial Freedom podcast. See you next time, and stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.